Hi, my goal today is to talk about some pretty large general concepts of religion, justice, ethics, morality, and truth, and to show how they're really all, in a certain way, different ways of looking at the same phenomenon. You may have noticed, if you've looked at a number of my previous YouTube videos, that I have often shown an interest in moral philosophy and talked a lot in philosophical terms. But I've also said and written a lot of things that have used some language that may sound religious, have religious overtones, although I've not been preaching for a particular religion or anything like that. And this is no accident. It is very much the case that I feel like there is a connection between these things that I want to explore and get people to think about. And I often find that as an experienced teacher, that talking about things in different ways, different kinds of language, reaches different people. So I'm hopeful that looking at it through all these different lenses can help us get to a certain place. I want to be clear from the outset that I am not a religious person in terms of practicing or believing in or being part of any specific religion. However, I am someone who has been a student of religious texts to some degree. I studied philosophy and religions in school, and it was not my major. It was something I dabbled in. But I did read, for instance, significant portions of the Bible and the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita. So I am at some level familiar with a lot of the holy texts of a number of different religions. And part of what I want to say here is that religion in general is, at a certain level, about humans' inner desire for justice and fairness. So you might think of this as there are good things that happen to bad people, bad things that happen to good people, and people want and need a way to cope with this, to understand this, to accept this. And one of the ideas of religion is this idea that there is an all-powerful creator or something that is enforcing justice beyond the mortal plane, to give us solace about the things that seem unfair to us. Now, you can think of this in terms of heaven and hell, for instance, but that's not the only place in religions where you have this kind of concept. The concept of karma, that doing good or bad ends up affecting you in the next life, is also related to this idea. And many religions sort of explore this idea in general. But I feel like in a lot of ways, what people want from religion, why they believe in it, is in a lot of ways tied to this concept of justice, which is also, of course, what our legal systems is supposed to be aiming at. And I also want to talk about ethics and morality. So ethics and morality are often used pretty interchangeably. Those two terms, according to a lot of professors of ethical philosophy and stuff like that, often mean the same thing. And to many other people, they mean the same thing. It is the case that certain segments of the population or certain conversations that are had, people may make a distinction between them. But when a distinction is made, which is not always the case, often we think of morality as good and bad as defined by an individual's norms, or ethics as right and wrong as defined by a society's norms. And I want to tell you from my perspective, and the way I really want to look at these things and I try to think of the world, this is sort of an unimportant or false distinction. This is not a distinction I really care about. But it's not to say that individuals' norms and society's norms don't occasionally get aligned. Obviously they do. But in my belief, the ultimate goal to live the most virtuous life possible, and I mean this both for the individual and the society, is to be fully, what I like to call, integrated. And I want to tell you here that this term, integrated, as I'm using it, is not something that, as far as I know, is in the parlance of modern philosophy or ethics. This is kind of my own term or own usage of this term. But when I say the word integrated, what I really mean is getting either the individual's norms or the society's norms, or preferably all of them, aligned as closely as possible to what is objectively good or right. And this is a very important idea that I think I've hinted at in a lot of my previous videos, is that I do believe there is an objective truth. There's an objective morality. I very much reject moral relativism. At the same time, I fully recognize that we are all imperfect, flawed human beings, and that we can never perceive the objective completely accurately. All we can strive to do is to get our vision, our understanding, our behavior to live closer and closer to that objective standard while never getting completely there. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the only measuring stick of what is objectively good or right is what is objectively true. Is really, we have to be able to see the world from a true point of view, get past our egos, and sort of defeat the ways in which we perceive the world in ways that is out of line with reality in order to become better people. Another thing that I've said in some of my previous videos that some people might find controversial or disagree with is that morality is 100% a matter of objectivity and 0% a matter of emotion. And I know that not everybody believes this or lives this way, but I think this is a very important concept to think about here. This is not saying that in order to be a good person, be just, or have a just society, we should be ignoring emotion, be callous or cruel to people. That's not what I mean at all by this. It is that emotion is a subjective thing. Everyone has their own emotions, their own personal points of view on things. And you can't build universal standards of ethics based on those things. When you are looking at situations and really trying to judge what is right or wrong, it doesn't mean that you ignore the emotional plane, but that the judgment of what is right or wrong is actually entirely an objective process. Looking at what actually happened as accurately as possible. Looking at what the practical effects of people's actions were on the world, but also what their emotional effects were on other people. But in the end, you're using the tools of objectivity to judge these things. And I've often talked, too, about how the justice system, when it comes to laws and enforcement of laws and judging situations, very much often uses a lot of language about how making judgments, making justice happen is a matter of putting aside emotion and focusing on the facts, on the reality of the situation. So I think that when a lot of people try to define morality, try to define what they think is good in terms of less objective factors, in terms of how they feel about something, this is what I like to call moral feelings. Is I feel in my heart or my gut that this is the right way, and that if you feel oppositely on this issue, you are in the wrong. And what I'm saying here is really that is not morality at all. That is an attempt to take a personal point of view and override what is objective, what is best for individuals and the world as a whole, with your own ego, with your own take on things, with your own value system. And we all have our own value systems, of course, what we care more or less about. And for that reason, particular political issues, particular moral issues might be more or less important to us. But what I believe is that there really is an objective standard. There is a way to build a morality, to build a just society, based on what actually is most important universally, what is most true universally, not just based on the individual preferences of people. And I want to point out, too, that I'm really big on truth. I'm really big on seeing the world as it is and doing the right thing, not just as I define it, but in terms of cutting to the heart of what is good for everyone, what is good for society as a whole. One thing I found interesting is that I've been asked at various times if I was religious or if I believed in God. And that's always been a sort of conundrum for me about how to answer a question like that. I kind of hate the term agnostic. I feel like it's just a cop-out. It says, like, I don't want to give an opinion on this. I often jokingly say that I am apatheistic. The question of whether there is a God does not keep me up at night. But what I really want to say is that I know many people who are very religious, and I know many people who are not religious at all, maybe even atheistic or humanistic or something else. And I feel like my worldview is not incompatible with any of theirs. I believe that we are all, as a human species, connected, and at a certain level, doing what is right for society as a whole is also doing what is best for us. And a lot of people need the language of a particular religion, a particular metaphor, a particular philosophy to get there. But in the end, I don't really care how you get there, as long as you get to that same reality, that if you are working at odds for what is good for society as a whole, then what you are doing is really not what's best for you either. And in the short term, it might seem to be. In the short term, you might be able to gain advantage by hurting other people, by taking advantage of them. But in the long term, it's really not going to be the best for you or anyone. I often think about this too in terms of an old sort of quasi-scientific idea called the Gaia hypothesis, the idea that we're all sort of one living organism on the earth, and all of us are sort of different organs of that organism altogether. There's, again, lots of different metaphors for how you can think about it here. But I want to sort of temper that with thinking about another type of situation, which is that, and I'm sure we've all been in these kinds of situations in our life, where, I may try to say that the truth is the highest good, but you might give a counter-argument that sometimes lying or breaking the rules is not necessarily the wrong thing. And I think a great example to think of that is the story of Anne Frank and her family that were, of course, hiding in an attic during the Holocaust, a Jewish family trying to survive during that time. And the people who were hiding them lied to the authorities. They were dishonest to try to protect this family. And were they doing the wrong thing? I certainly don't think so. So you can say that, yes, there are times where lying or being dishonest is warranted. But I want to be really careful about that, because the thing I think is most important to understand is that when you are in situations where lying or dishonest or bad behavior is warranted, and I want to call it bad behavior, but behavior that's perhaps, not in accordance with what we think are objective standards for the right way to behave, it's really because of immoral people in power who are living a greater lie. In this case, the Nazis, right? The idea is that they were embodying a particular untruth, that Jews were not as deserving of life and liberty as other humans. And it was really because of this oppressive regime living this lie that forced people under them to do things like lie or be dishonest themselves in order to resist this oppressive regime. And I think these kind of things happen a lot. Heck knows they're happening more and more often in our current society. But the point I really want to make here is that good society, good leadership, is moral in a way that does not force other people to do bad things to survive or to protect each other. And in the end, although in the short term you might need to lie, you might need to do dishonest things in order to just handle the particular situation you're in, the greater problem to be solved, the real fundamental way you fix the situation, is to fix the greater lie. is to get the immoral people out of power and stop society from living that lie. So in the end, the way we really get there is to make sure that not just the individuals, but society as a whole is living the higher truth, that all people are created equal, that we all are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And of course, I am very much quoting the American founding documents here, but I want to be clear that part of what I think is great about America and what I love about America is that even though we didn't always live up to our words, we did write documents that very much got at a lot of those right philosophical ideas about what we should be doing in building a human society. And again, we're all flawed humans. We all fail to reach that objective standard sometimes. But I think there's a lot of evidence to show that the government America set out to build when it was first formed as an independent country was really onto a lot of right universal things. And the reason I say this is not just because of what Americans think of the country. It's because of the impact that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution have had on much of the rest of the world. There are many, many other nations in the world that have made their own founding documents modeled on the US Constitution, that have tried to build a government in a similar image because they recognized that the US was really aiming for a lot of these right things about making a society that is fully integrated, where the society's norms are aligned as closely as possible to what is objectively good. So, all in all, what I really want to stress here is that to be a good person, you've got to see the world objectively. You've got to get past your emotions. To be a good society, you need to align with what is objectively true. And we're in a very, very sad state where more and more people are defining their notions of truth, their notions of goodness, based on their partisanship, on their tribalism. And this is, in my opinion, the biggest problem with society as a whole right now. I think it's fair to say that we are in some ways headed to another dark age, and that we need a new enlightenment where we really get back to focusing on objective good and truth and rightness.